So tonight's session is called Forgiveness, a Humanist Value, and Mary-Anne is our speaker tonight. And what the session is about today is that Mary-Anne will do a brief presentation followed by discussion on the topic of forgiveness. Forgiveness is often said to be a Christian value, and it's not specifically mentioned in the Declaration of Modern Humanism. Yet it is included as one of the 9 values of Humanists Australia. Why is it there, and what does it mean for humanists? Now, a little about Mary-Anne. Mary-Anne Cosgrove is CEO and one of the founders of Humanists Australia. In 2020, she worked with the Humanists Australia Working Group to draft the initial values of Humanists Australia. She worked with the board and interested members to propose a change to the forgiveness value that was accepted by members at Humanists Australia's 2023 annual general meeting. So I'll hand it over now to Mary-Anne. Now, Mary-Anne's planning on speaking for around about 20 minutes. And then, as I said, there'll be plenty of time for discussion and questions after that. So over to you, Mary-Anne.
All right, thanks for that lovely introduction, Les. As Les mentioned, I am CEO of Humanists Australia. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from Ngunnawal and Ngambri land, and sovereignty was never ceded. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and recognise their continuing connection to culture and country. I acknowledge and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. I'll listen to your voices, do my best to understand your lived experiences, and speak up when I see you suffering from injustice. Tonight in this presentation and discussion, we're exploring forgiveness. Forgiveness is often said to be a Christian value, and it's not specifically mentioned in the Declaration of Modern Humanism, yet it's included as one of the 9 values of Humanists Australia. Why is it there, and what does it mean for humanists? So Humanists Australia has published what we believe are the core humanist values, with descriptions that help explain what humanism means to our members. The 9 core values are largely based on the Declaration of Modern Humanism. They are compassion, community, reason, diversity, resolve, integrity, culture, environment, and forgiveness. Oh, you've got the poster of them there, Meg. That's lovely. The text of our forgiveness value reads, "Part of being human is making mistakes. When we make a mistake, we apologize. We do our best to make amends and learn from the mistakes we make. When someone harms us, we try to forgive. Where an apology and conciliation between parties has been achieved, we all strive to not renew the conflict." So I have been teaching the humanist values, the HA values, along with other aspects of humanism in my monthly or bi-monthly now talk, What is Humanism? And during that presentation, I often get the question, isn't forgiveness a Christian value? And so tonight I want to answer that question and explore the differences between the Christian concept of forgiveness and the humanist concept of forgiveness. And there are many differences, and we'll take a look at those. And let's also explore, why does HA include that in its set of 9 values, specifically given that it's not explicitly mentioned in the Declaration of Modern Humanism. Well, actually, forgiveness features as a major value in many religions. Islam views forgiveness as a virtue and a path to peace. Allah is described as Al-Ghafur, the oft-forgiving, and Muslims are encouraged to seek and offer forgiveness. The Quran recommends forgiveness while also allowing for justified retaliation. During Eid, the festive holiday that marks the end of Ramadan, Muslims actively seek forgiveness from one another for any wrongdoings they committed during the year. The greeting Salamat Hari Raya, Maaf Zahir Dan Batin, Happy Hari Raya, I seek forgiveness from you physically and spiritually, is commonly used. And my apologies if I butchered the pronunciation of that. Judaism teaches that one must seek forgiveness from those they've wronged. It emphasizes the importance of sincere apology and repentance, teshuvah. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is dedicated to seeking forgiveness and cleansing oneself of sins accumulated over the past year. It provides an opportunity for Jews to seek forgiveness and start anew. The Torah states that on this day, atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you. From all your sins before the Lord, you shall be cleansed. Buddhism sees forgiveness as a means to prevent harmful thoughts and maintain mental well-being. It encourages the release of resentments through meditation and insight into the nature of reality. Hinduism considers forgiveness as a way to remove negative emotions and improve karma. It emphasizes seeking forgiveness for one's own wrongdoings as well as forgiving others. Sikhism views forgiveness, or khema, as a remedy to anger and a divine gift. It's seen as generating peace, tranquility, and humility in human interactions. And Jainism promotes universal forgiveness as part of its nonviolent philosophy, encouraging followers to forgive all living beings. As it's such a common feature of religions, I believe that forgiveness arose naturally in human societies, predating all of the modern religions. Forgiveness has also been used historically as a way of healing rifts in societies. 3 examples are the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa. The objectives of the commission were to promote reconciliation and forgiveness among perpetrators and victims of apartheid who suffered gross human violations between March 1960 and May 1994. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada facilitated reconciliation among former students of the Indian residential schools, their families, their communities, and all Canadians. Here in Australia, the Uluru Statement from the Heart asked for makarata, the coming together after a struggle, in the form of truth-telling and reconciliation. Let's now take a look at how forgiveness works in Christianity and contrast that with how it works for humanists. So what needs to be forgiven? In Christianity, disobeying any of God's commands, or original sin. So original sin is the concept that people inherit the sins that were committed by their forefathers or their parents. And that's handed down to individuals, and each individual must be forgiven for that original sin. And that goes all the way back to the original sin of Eve when she picked the forbidden fruit. It's always seemed to me to be rather unfair to blame children for the sins of their ancestors. And then there are impure thoughts. That's a common sin that Catholics will seek forgiveness for. And it just seems like such a burden on a person to need to be forgiven for things that they've merely thought about. I mean, we're all human. We all have human urges, and impure thoughts come pretty naturally. And if we don't act on them, it's not harming anyone. In contrast to that, in humanism, we need forgiveness if we harm another person, either deliberately or accidentally. And because we're human, this is something that's going to happen, pretty commonly. We do make mistakes, and we do get carried away with our emotions and do things that we regret later. And especially if you're upset someone who you're trying to work with. I mean, even if you make an offhand comment and they happen to take offense, and you normally wouldn't feel like you need forgiveness from maybe a stranger that you saw on the street, if you're trying to work with someone and have a productive relationship with that person, it's worth seeking forgiveness. Who does the forgiving? In Christianity, it's God who does the forgiving. It comes down from on high. In humanism, it's the person, the human, who's been harmed or been upset, who needs to do the forgiving. How does forgiveness happen? In Christianity, it happens through the martyrdom of Jesus. Accepting Jesus as your savior leads to your forgiveness. And again, it seems, as a humanist, it seems terribly cruel to me for God to say to his only son that you must suffer and die for the sins of all humanity. It wasn't his fault that we're sinful. Why is there this system of needing to recognize this savior, him needing to die for us? And in the Catholic Church, through confession, you need to go into the church and confess your sins in order to be forgiven. And often that comes with donating to the church in any of the Christian religions. In humanism, by contrast, it happens usually through open and honest communication with the person who you've upset or harmed. Sometimes that's not possible, and sometimes it's worth seeking forgiveness for yourself by looking within. I'll talk a little bit more about that situation later. But what happens after forgiveness? In Christianity, in the New Testament at least, you're supposed to turn the other cheek. From Matthew 18, 21 to 22, Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" And Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." And of course, that's not meant literally. Peter's not supposed to keep a tally and give up when he gets to 77 times. Jesus means that you should forgive someone over and over and over again without end if they sin against you. In humanism, we recommend that people strive not to renew a conflict after forgiveness, and you need to forgive in order to rebuild trust in that relationship. But if someone keeps hurting you over and over and over again, you must protect yourself. And you can forgive someone while still protecting yourself and separating yourself from that relationship. And I'll talk more about that too later. What happens without forgiveness? In Christianity, if God doesn't forgive you, you are tortured for eternity in hell. And, you know, you have a very short, finite lifespan on earth, and to be tortured endlessly in hell for mistakes that you've made while you're on the earth, words fail me. I find that one of the most appalling aspects of Christianity. In humanism, there are consequences if forgiveness is not reached, and the main consequences are a breakdown in relationships between people, which can sometimes mean a fracturing of the workplace or losing someone who's a valued contributor to the work that you're doing. And there's also a loss of mental well-being. If you've harmed someone and they've not forgiven you, that can weigh heavily on you and cause you to suffer anguish and feelings of guilt and shame. So if you can't get forgiveness from someone who you've harmed, it's really important to do the internal work of looking inwards and figuring out how to forgive yourself. Did anyone have any questions about those comparisons and contrasts between humanist forgiveness and Christian forgiveness before I go on? Let's take a look at why we include forgiveness as one of the 9 values of Humanists Australia. From the Declaration of Modern Humanism, 2 direct quotes. "We hold that personal liberty must be combined with the responsibility to society. A free person has duties to others, and we feel a duty of care to all of humanity, including future generations, and beyond this to all sentient beings." And secondly, we recognize that we are part of nature and accept our responsibility for the impact we have on the rest of the natural world. And it's this sense of responsibility that's built into the Declaration of Modern Humanism. This is a reason why we value resolve. We're determined to stand up for what we believe is right. We strive to work for a better future for ourselves, our family, our community, and the world. We're not afraid to speak truth to power. We persevere even in the face of adversity. As we take action towards that better future, we can work alone or we can work together. Individuals working alone can make some difference, but the real impact we can have is when we build a social movement together. Working together also gives us the opportunity to build caring relationships with each other, which is an important part of finding fulfillment in life. So we've included forgiveness in HA's values because it's an essential part of building that social movement. It helps to heal the rifts that inevitably spring up between people working together. It can hold together an organisation that would otherwise break apart into factions. Forgiveness is also needed for diverse communities, and diversity, valuing all people regardless of their religion. We value people who are religious, even though we know that they're different from us. We We value working with them, and we believe everyone has the right to equal rights and equal opportunities. And we value community. We want to bring people together and work together on any areas where we have common interests. And when dialogue between opposite sides in a debate breaks down into name-calling, threats, or abuse, it's forgiveness that can restore civility. When communities are at war with each other in never-ending tit-for-tat cycles of violence, it's forgiveness that can break them out of it. So forgiveness is key for building those diverse communities. Forgiveness is also needed for our own individual mental well-being. Forgiving others releases you from feelings of anger and thoughts of revenge after someone has harmed you, even if you never tell the person that you've forgiven them. Being forgiven releases you from feelings of guilt and shame that swirl around you after you've hurt someone. Release from these negative emotions can allow you to move on with your life and begin to flourish again. And we're all about helping human beings lead flourishing lives. Are there any questions about forgiveness as a humanist value? We'll move on then. Let's talk now about how humanists can put forgiveness into action. There are two sides to this: seeking forgiveness and forgiving others. Part of being human is making mistakes. I developed my own process of handling errors through many years of practice screwing up and making amends. The steps I developed for myself are: forgive yourself. Human. Sometimes we hurt people by mistake, and sometimes our emotions get the better of us and we hurt people deliberately. These steps can be used in both cases. Acknowledge your mistake and the harm that you've caused. Offer a sincere apology, but don't expect forgiveness. You can't assume that someone's going to forgive you. You can't demand forgiveness. It has to come naturally. You may need to apologize multiple times. And maybe the person just doesn't want to talk to you ever again, but you can at least try. Do what you can to repair the damage. Sometimes there's nothing that can be done, and all you can do is apologize. But sometimes there are concrete steps that you can take to help do some repair. And then finally, learn from it. Do what you can to ensure you don't repeat the same mistake. Interestingly, while researching this talk, I discovered that Judaism has a process known as teshuvah that's very similar to my steps 2 to 5. Acknowledging the wrongdoing, expressing sincere remorse, making amends, and committing to change. Jewish law recommends attempting to obtain forgiveness up to 3 times. If forgiveness is still not granted after 3 sincere attempts, the sin is considered to be on the person refusing to forgive. Right, let's take a look now at the other side of the coin. You've been hurt by someone you have a relationship with. First, let's assume that you are safe speaking with the other person. In this case, firstly, be open and honest about your feelings. When you did this thing, I felt. So if you're talking about your own feelings, that's not something that can be argued with. You're just expressing how you felt. So it's less likely to engender an argument than by starting off saying, you busted my dolly, or whatever it is. Look within yourself when you're having this discussion. Perhaps you actually contributed to the situation. Try and keep an open mind about your own contribution to the case. Discuss the way forward with the other person. Is there any way that you can rebuild your relationship? What do you need from them? How can you trust that person again? And finally, strive not to renew that conflict again. Hopefully, after you've discussed the way forward, you'll work out how to avoid that. But what if you're not safe? In this case, the first step has to be to remove yourself from that person or otherwise ensure your own safety. Think about whether you can prevent this person from hurting others. Do you need to contact the police? Or do you need to tell other people that they shouldn't be trusting this person? you need to talk about what's happened, either with your friends, with a counselor, with a therapist, maybe with the police. And eventually, in order to let go of what's happened, you need to look inwards. And that talking with other people will help you do that introspective work and find ways of eventual forgiveness or acceptance of what's happened. Now, sometimes doing concrete things like writing it all down on a piece of paper and then burning the piece of paper, or folding that paper into a paper boat and floating that paper boat down the stream. That sort of concrete action can help you release those feelings of hurt and upset. So that comes to the end of the presentation part. I'll move us into discussion with, actually, let me just recap first. Tonight in this presentation and discussion, we spoke about how forgiveness is often spoken of as a Christian value, but it in fact features in many of the world's religions and therefore is likely to have been a precursor to all of them. And we've spoken about how it is one of HA's values and why it is, and how we can incorporate forgiveness into our everyday lives. Let's now move into discussion, and I have these guidelines for discussions. What happens in forgiveness stays in forgiveness. Please don't divulge anything said here today to anyone else. We listen to each other with an open mind and an open heart. We leave space when we speak so that everyone has a fair opportunity to have their say. We avoid interrupting each other. If you can't get a word in edgewise because you can't get space to speak, please raise your hand. It's not necessary to raise your hand if you get space. If you see someone with their hand raised, please finish your thought quickly and allow them to speak. And finally, we speak respectfully to each other, even when we disagree. Is everyone happy with these guidelines? Any questions at all? All right, well, here are some questions to prompt the discussion. Do you agree that forgiveness is an important value for humanists? Is there anything that cannot be forgiven, ever? Are you willing to share a time when being forgiven helped you heal? Can you share a time when forgiving someone else helped you heal? Has forgiveness or lack of it had an impact in your workplace, your social group, or your family? And before we just break apart into the discussion, I just want to let people know that I haven't been very well myself. I may not be able to stay for the full discussion. I'll just make my way out quietly and leave you with Les if I need to depart. And if you'd like to support our work, please go to humanistaustralia.org/support. The best way you can help us if you identify as being a humanist is by joining us. But you can also make a one-off donation to any one of our 5 programs or as a general donation. We have a partnership with Gathered Here, so you can write your online will for free and include us if you wish. And we're also always on the lookout for volunteers. I'll come back to these questions for discussion now, and I'll leave that with you. I'll stop sharing my screen after we've got the discussion underway.
Yeah, don't all speak at once. Don't be shy. I'm sure you've all had opportunities in your life where there was a need to forgive, or you felt the need for someone to forgive you.
And don't feel constrained by these questions. Do ask any questions of your own that you might have, or just make any comments or thoughts that you might have.
Can I make a start?
Go ahead, Meg.
So, actually, forgiveness for me has been, along with respect, 2 of the most powerful anchors of my life, and that I have tried to instill with children. I have often been told that I say sorry a lot, And I know there's a difference, a big difference between saying sorry and forgiveness. I suppose that's more of an observation. But I have always firmly believed that it's easier to to forgive, maybe not myself, but to forgive, so that you can move forward and um, um, hold on to relationships and hopefully nurture them.
I fully agree with that, Meg. I've actually had advice as a woman in business, in technology in particular, that you should avoid saying sorry.
Yes.
I think that is absolutely the wrong advice. It's given, I think men are less likely to say sorry than women are. And so it's seen to be a weakness, because it's seen to be an attribute of women that they tend to say sorry more. But I recall the CEO of Envato, a company I was working for. He gave a really sincere apology, a public apology, when our passwords were hacked and customers lost their passwords. And I respected him so much the more because he took responsibility at the highest level and he gave an open public apology for it. And to me, that just increased my estimation of his character no end. I think it takes a really strong person to offer a public apology. And even a private apology can be difficult. And so I see someone who is willing to apologize as someone who's really strong, not someone who's weak.
Oh, thank you. Could I just also add that I worked in the health industry, in hospitals, and at one stage we had a process introduced to us called open disclosure, and had quite a bit of training in how to undertake open disclosure. And it was incredibly foreign to a lot of people, especially in the health industry, that why would you say sorry? That opens you up to litigation.
Yes, I've heard that before too.
Yes, which I found um, almost counterintuitive. But there had been, through the training, one of the sort of stellar issues that came up was that, in fact, except for maybe America, where because of their insurance schemes within the health industry, and litigation seems to almost be part of the
The daily event.
yes, indeed. That if you undertake sincere forgiveness and a process of open disclosure, we're really sorry that this happened. We hope that we can assist you to move forward. So this is usually in Sentinel events and SAC1, really serious issues. By and large, when working with people, very much as you've talked about, Mary-Anne, people don't end up litigating. They don't want to go down that path. They want sincerely to know that this is never going to happen again,
Yeah,
and that we really are sorry.
yeah. I think having that warmth of relationship between the two parties is going to make it much less likely for litigation to happen.
Yes.
Karen's got her hand up.
I'm just thinking that I do believe that there are some things that can't be forgiven. So what is a different position that's halfway between blame and anger and forgiveness? And I've worked with as a counsellor with survivors of torture, seen people and families absolutely decimated, as we see around the world today. So that in those larger than life, unless you're someone like Viktor Frankl, in those larger than life circumstances, the torturer would say there is no God in this room. So they remove the one comfort that someone might have. And if we believe that we can forgive those people, I don't. The best I can do is understand them and think they've been brutalised themselves, like I believe Trump's been brutalised.
Yes.
I can't forgive Hitler, and I can't forgive some of the people that I've come across.
So I think that's where the concept of acceptance comes in, that Julio was talking about the other night, and which I mentioned briefly during the talk. If you can't reach forgiveness, then maybe you can reach acceptance. You accept that this is what happened, and it probably happened because that other person was brutalized, but I don't have to forgive them. If I can just accept it and move on with my life, perhaps that's enough for my own mental well-being. And I don't have to communicate the fact that I've accepted to the torturer or whoever it is.
So accept that it's a wrong action, but don't retaliate with anger.
Yes. Forgiveness itself is not about saying that the action wasn't wrong either. You recognize that it was a wrong action and you're still willing to forgive if you can forgive. But yes, as you say, it's not always possible. Neville's got his hand up.
Oh, I just want to affirm what's being said, and I think the way to make sense of it is that what Mary-Anne's presented is a dynamic relationship. So if one factor is not there, then things can't move forward into forgiveness. I mean, I don't think, you can't forgive someone if they don't acknowledge the harm, and the other person can't acknowledge the harm that's been given. I think then there's a breakdown in that relationship that you were talking about.
Maybe you can't forgive them to their face. Maybe you can't rebuild that relationship, but perhaps it's possible for you to forgive them within yourself so that you can let it go and move on.
Yes, that's acceptance. I think that, so I think, there's forgiveness and there's acceptance. And so if you can't, if there's no equal relationship, connection in terms that the person that, who's done the offence can't, if they're blocking that passage off, then I think then acceptance is, as you say, acceptance is the other alternative.
I'm just wondering, how do people who are, for instance, have religion at the core of their values, and then reach a point where they can't forgive God? That's, I must think that is a form of purgatory.
No, it's not. Look, I think Mary-Anne's given a very good presentation, but perhaps the discussion around the differences around forgiveness in Christianity or religion today, and what it is for humanism is a little bit too black and white. Theologians talk about all the time believers not being able to forgive God, so, and there's a whole area of literature and thought around, what do they call it, theodicity. Is that right, Sam? What's the word I'm looking for here?
Theodicy.
Theodicy. Yeah, that's right. So, and a lot of it, some of it, look, to be honest, some of it is traditional apologetics, but not all of it.
I remember when my husband, he's got MS, and he had his second attack 3 years after his first attack, and we didn't get a proper diagnosis until his second attack. And he's always been a very athletic and fit person. And I just got so angry, so very angry, that he had this horrible disease, and he could, at the time, he could barely breathe, he could barely walk. He's come back from that. I'll say he's good at walking now. He walks further than I do, much further. So he's doing well now. But at the time, I wanted to believe in God so that I'd have someone to be angry at, because I had all of this internal anger and nothing to do with it, nothing I could do with it. And it took going down to a retreat in the Yarra Valley for people with MS, for me to be able to process what had happened and let it go through a lot of just allowing myself space to feel the feelings, and allow myself to cry and allow myself to just recognize what had happened, and that it's all the fault of the uncaring universe. It's nothing personal against David. But it was remarkable how quickly I was able to reach some form of acceptance with those methods of giving myself space to feel and let go. And there was a bit of writing things down and burning them as well, that kind of thing. So yeah, you need to find some way to let go. Where before I was just shaking my fist, wishing there was a God up there that I could not forgive.
I am interested. I have no issue at all with compassion and forgiveness as humanist values. The explanation you provided, Mary-Anne, was very interesting in terms of reading forgiveness into the modern declaration, and what I would probably read into that same passage is the importance of respect for others. So respect is a kind of primary humanist value. So I'm slightly surprised, and I guess that's partly my question, that isn't there explicitly as an HA value. And
It's written
related to that is
this.
probably fairness, because if you look at political science and political philosophy in the modern period, there's concerns around justice, equality, and fairness. So respect seems the more fundamental kind of human response to so many of these situations. And then justice or fairness seems like the democratic or social or political kind of layer on top of the individual response. So I think all of those values that I've mentioned can be read into the Humanist Australia values. I'm just curious that they aren't explicit in some ways, being respect and fairness.
Our diversity value is about respect for other people. I'm just going to bring up the text of those. And there's also a section on respect for others in our compassion value, I think. Let's see now. We speak respectfully to others even when we disagree is in our compassion value. And in diversity, we say we value and respect people for their own sake and treat them ethically as equals.
Excellent, thank you. I suppose if I may continue, I suppose a kind of movement question maybe, as well as a philosophical question. 9 values, and again, I've got absolutely no issue with any of them, but the foregrounding of a particular set of values, without perhaps listing others that you'd find, in a school kind of, signs, at least in Melbourne, there are a lot of them all around the streets. I mean, one can't have too many, I suppose, from a practical point of view. It's just that there are other values like equality. I had a conversation with Les and others, at Philosophy Matters group at his place just a week ago. And again, equality seems like such a fundamental humanist value, and yet it's not explicitly there either.
But that's also within diversity. We treat people ethically as equals. And we believe all should have the same rights and opportunities. So it's there. It's just not like equality isn't out there as a as one of the core values. These values are not set in stone. They can be modified. If anyone thinks that any of these values need to be modified, if we need to add one or remove one, anyone's welcome to bring or any of our members are welcome to bring a request for modification to a general meeting of our members, and we'll vote on it. And if you want to propose a change and you want to know what other people think of it before putting it to a vote, you're welcome to discuss that in one of our monthly members circle events. Neville, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I thought I might help here in terms of this conversation. As Kiva knows, of course, there is contention within value theory because you have those that want to increase, ad infinitum, the number of possible values, and then you've got the other possibility in the other direction of those that want to reduce everything down to a core value. So what's happening in the United States, I think I mentioned this before, with the Unitarian Universalist Association in America, they've just going through a schism where because those that were in positions of authority and decision making in the UA decided to go in the direction of reducing things down to a core value. That is, except that what historically existed was 12 principles. They call them principles rather than values. But I think, I don't think it helps to have a nuanced argument about the difference between values and principles. But what the association, sort of under the sort of radical takeover in the decision making, was that wouldn't have 12 principles. They would have one core value, I suppose, or principle, which is love, and that's it. It's the Beatles song, it's John Lennon's song, all you need is love. And so those that were educated, a bit deeper in philosophy and ethics basically broke away now. So there is the congregations of Unitarians Association or something like that. So I think this is the problem that one has to be very careful about. And in as Kiva knows, in value theory arguments, it's not certain how practical and effective this is for organizations because, look, I think it's a good thing. Don't get me wrong, it's a good thing, but it's, it doesn't necessarily always, I think, clearly address bad behavior within an organization. That's the criticism about value theory. You sort of articulate something and then, you forget about it, and people don't really sort of don't address the connection between the value stated and the behavior, which involves a whole lot of hermeneutics.
I've got a lot to say in reply to that, Neville. I think starting with the idea that love is enough, I think there's always going to be people that you cannot love. And if love is your only value, it doesn't say anything about how you treat people that you cannot love. And I think that's why you need something like diversity and integrity and community. And when it comes to behavior within organizations, we back up these values with a code of conduct as well. So we expect our members and our community leaders must be members. So this is especially important for our community leaders. We expect them to align with these values and to abide by the code of conduct. And we've found having this set of values to be a really useful way of having conversations when things go awry, because we can say something like, well, when you posted this video and didn't offer any support to the minority group that was being attacked in that video, that's not appropriate according to our diversity value. You can have those kinds of conversations and lay out the kinds of behaviour that you'd expect in the future from one of our members or leaders.
Yes. My comments, Mary-Anne, were more supportive of your position or our position in terms of what we've established. So it's, and I was more challenging, actually. My comments were more challenging in terms of the concerns that Akiva was raising.
There is some history to why we have 9 of these, which I could go into, but I see that Vince and KJ both have their hands up. So let's go to Vince now.
Yeah, look, I've got 2 points to make. The first one is relating to what you were saying, Mary-Anne, that core values in organisations can be quite powerful if they're linked to behaviours, and they need to be linked with behaviours through the leadership group, but also through things like performance management systems. They need to be reiterated, reinforced in communications, and things like that. And when that starts to happen, that's when people start to see that management is taking this stuff seriously. And if you get out of step from those, some action or consequences will eventuate. So I think it's a question of how it's presented, how it's implemented, that's quite important. And I've seen both it being implemented quite well and in other places where it hasn't been implemented.
I mentioned Envato earlier. Envato had a very clear set of company values and really lived those values from the top down. And that inspired me actually to create these values it was originally for the ACT Humanist Society, and then it evolved into a set of values for Human Union, and then it evolved into the Humanists Australia ones.
And they can also be used as a guide when there's a lot of change going on and you want to shift the organisational culture into something else. They can be a powerful tool for doing that. Just going back to forgiveness, I agree with almost everything you've said, Mary-Anne, and I think it is important to be able to forgive people, and also yourself, having that inner sense of looking at yourself, questioning yourself, what you're doing. But the one thing that is at the back of my mind is that there's almost an implicit assumption that someone's to blame for something. And that's the bit that I can't sort of reconcile with, because in a lot of cases, particularly when there's interpersonal conflict, it's not necessarily the fault of one person or the other. And I like to see it more as looking for having an open dialogue, a conversation. But these conversations need to be sincere. They need to be authentic. And that's the nuance that I would attach to the concept of forgiveness, because it's not necessarily, in a lot of cases, there's historical stuff that's happened. And that's why people might overreact in a particular situation. So they may be at fault for the new situation, but not necessarily if you put it into a wider context, that you could sort of immediately understand why that person reacted the way they did. So I think, we need a more nuanced approach.
That's a really great point, Vince. I agree with you 100%. KJ's had his hand up for a while. Did you have a question, KJ?
Yeah.
Okay, KJ has asked in the chat if we
Casey?
can hear you. KJ, I don't think we
Casey?
can, unfortunately. Microphone maybe not working.
If you can put your question in the chat, KJ.
While KJ is looking for his voice, and I wish you well with that, KJ. I was just thinking from what Vince was saying about there not necessarily being somebody to blame. Sometimes there are systems that are to blame, if you like, for something going wrong between individuals, between a whole range of humans. And that's where being able to join together to find where the breakdown in systems may have occurred is so important. And that in itself can be a means of rectifying relationships that broke down, not because of the two people or the two entities, but because of the systems that were at play.
Yep. You often need to be looking for a variety of causes that all contributed to a certain situation. KJ's typed his question in. He says, sorry for the late entry into the meeting. Has there been any discussing about, 1, how we can practice forgiveness in our lives? 2, what makes forgiveness difficult? 3, why forgive? And 4, how we should deal with guilt if we've formerly done a lot of harm that we would never be forgiven for. We did talk a bit about that, KJ, and in particular, if you've done harm yourself, you need to be able to forgive yourself somehow or reach acceptance of what you did. And you may need to work that through by talking over what you've done. If you can't talk to the people you've harmed, then talk to friends or a counselor or a therapist, and come to understand why it is, what were the pressures on you that drove you to do that thing. And sometimes the pressures are just as simple as being human. Why forgive? We did cover that. In order to reach your own mental well-being and contribute to the mental well-being of the person you've the person who's harmed you as well. And what makes forgiveness difficult? That's something that we haven't really spoken about. I think there's 2 different emotions that can really make forgiveness difficult. One is anger, and needing to let go of that anger. It's difficult to forgive someone that you still feel very angry with. And the other emotion is a feeling of face or honor, that you can't forgive someone because that would lead to a loss of face on your part. And I think that's a barrier for people in a position of power, usually, making it harder to actually probably more hard to ask forgiveness of someone rather than to forgive. But I think it's a barrier both to forgiving and being forgiven. Vince, you've had your hand up for a while.
Just a very brief comment following on from what Meg was saying. Just an example that I heard earlier today. I was listening to an interview with Stephen Kotkin, who's a specialist in Russian history, and he was saying during the time that Stalin imprisoned a whole lot of people in the Gulag, after that was dismantled, some of the people remained, and the people were, some of them were prisoners and some of them were the prison officers, and they came together, and became friends. You know, they sort of coexisted, became friends. So that is I think a good example. I don't know a lot about that part of the history, but I think that's probably a good example of forgiveness in practice, I guess.
I think in order to reach forgiveness, there needs to be truth-telling and reconciliation. And that's why there were the commissions in South Africa and Canada, and I'm sure there've been other truth-telling and reconciliation commissions in other places as well. And I think so much of our Indigenous trauma here is trauma passed down through generations of intergenerational trauma caused by colonisation and policies and actions taken against our Indigenous people. And I don't think that intergenerational trauma can reduce until there's been truth-telling. And I know it's not my fault as a white Australian that these things happened in our history, but I'm willing to listen to the true histories and find out what happened and acknowledge the part of white Australians in making our First Nations people's lives terribly difficult.
And I think that's why for many Aboriginals this is so hurtful, because John Howard refused to partake in the apology. And I've seen the same kind of thinking from Tony Abbott. I've heard them both say that the past wasn't so bad for the Aborigines. Colonialism brought a lot of good stuff, so they don't even recognise the harm. So you can't even go to that first step in forgiveness, in forgiving, when the other party thinks that everything was okay. What are you complaining about? It made your life better.
But this goes back to the issue of authenticity, because even if those people that you have described, Howard and Abbott, did make an apology, you probably wouldn't put much weight on it because the authenticity isn't there.
Well, Kevin Rudd apologised and it felt genuine, but it hasn't led to a lot of change for our First Nations people. There's still a lot of work to be done. As we saw in the referendum, the tragic referendum.
There was a paper presented at the Australian Association for Studies in Religion on the apology, quite a detailed study, and basically linking the fact that I suppose the point here is that the apology was only a first step, and the voice referendum was seen by those involved in that forgiveness process as being the second step. That, you know, so that there was not only an apology, but there was some recompense in terms of a very basic recompense of just providing that social political voice. So, and because that wasn't carried through, you're sort of in this no man's land.
It's hard to see what the way forward is from here.
Could I just make a comment there? I've always believed that if you know better, you should do better. And I can't believe in the genuineness of an apology when you maintain, when somebody maintains or a group maintains the original position, and there's a power imbalance that is inherent in and has been perpetuated from colonial times right through today. So even though we know better, we don't necessarily do better.
It's terribly difficult to give up power that you have, and that's a big part of the blockage that we've got here.
And we're going to see that played out next year in our own, our forthcoming federal elections, aren't we? There's so much we could talk there about, but that's not what we need to talk about at the moment.
I would like to have that conversation, though. In fact, the board was discussing on our board meeting last night that we should give our members an opportunity to give their opinion on what issues we should be pursuing or talking about, at least in the lead up to the federal election.
I would be very, very keen to be involved in that dialogue. Thank you.
The discussion reminds me of what I'd call a pseudo apology, especially if some media commentator or someone reasonably well known is forced to apologise by their employer or by their peer group for saying something sexist or racist, for example. And it goes like this. The apology goes like this. I'm sorry if you took my comment that way.
Yes, that's right. The classic non-apology. I'm so sorry you were offended by my statement. It's like turning the blame around onto the other person for taking offense.
How could you be so silly for misunderstanding my
yes.
And how often
quite harmless comment.
And how often do we hear somebody say, no offense, but
well, if you know it's going to be offensive, why are you going to say it?
I think has anyone seen the film Blink Twice with Channing Tatum? No. He's like the CEO of some tech company thing, and they played out the apologies very much that it's a good example. Like,
it's pretty classic, unfortunately. So we're a little bit quiet at the moment. I might just read through those questions that I had earlier, just in case they jog anyone's thoughts. Do you agree that forgiveness is an important value for humanists? Is there anything that cannot be forgiven? Can you share a time when being forgiven helped you heal? Can you share a time when forgiving someone else helped you heal? Sorry. Has forgiveness or lack of it had an impact in your workplace, social group, or family?
Just looking through those questions, I do wonder whether forgiveness is more important for the person doing the forgiving if they've been consumed with anger and it's detracting them from leading a good life. And for those kinds of people that are consumed by anger and thoughts that are sucking the energy and living the rest of their life, that forgiveness is more important for them rather than, I contrast that with someone like me, because there's three people I can think of that I haven't forgiven. And I don't feel the need, well, I mean, one reason why I haven't forgiven them is because they don't recognise they've caused any harm, first thing. But even if they did, I probably still wouldn't forgive them anyway because I don't feel the need to forgive. And I'm a really calm kind of person who doesn't get consumed by those kinds of thoughts. So I haven't got that psychological drive to feel the need to forgive and get some resolution. I mean, I've cut these people out of my life, so it doesn't affect me anymore, and I'm not spending time thinking about it. So I'm just wondering whether the need to forgive has that is more needed by those who well up with anger, and it's an ongoing thing in their life. Have you got any thoughts on that, Mary-Anne?
I think that's very true, Les. It may not be necessary to reach forgiveness for yourself if it's not harming your own mental well-being. And if you don't have to work with that person, It's a lot more necessary if it's a person that you need to continue working with. See you later, Sam. Good to see you tonight.
Yeah.
If you can cut the person out of your life and that doesn't bother anyone, then yeah, it's not so important. It does make it difficult if it's in a family. If, for example, you're harboring angry feelings against a parent, and you know they've harmed you as you were growing up, and you haven't seen much of them, but when you try to have family gatherings for Christmas or whatever it is, it's always really awkward because they're there, and you know there's that ongoing ill will. I think in that kind of situation, you really need to be looking at how you can find forgiveness and whether you can talk about your parent before it's too late. So with parents in particular, you know, if you don't tell that person that you've forgiven them, and they pass away, you lose that opportunity, and you might have a lifetime of regret for the things that you never said. And so I think in that kind of situation, working out how to find forgiveness is a lot more important.
And actually, hearing you say that, taking the opportunity before somebody dies, actually for somebody who did die that caused a lot of harm, I missed the opportunity to tell them what harm they caused because they thought they were doing okay. So the impetus there for me would have been not to forgive them, but to actually let them know what harm they caused. But then again, Sam, the reason why I didn't do that is because doing that, putting myself in a situation where I'm confronting them, that would cause enormous anxiety for me. So that's why I never worried about doing it. But then again, the plus side is not either forgiving and not confronting, doing neither of those things hasn't really impacted the rest of my life because I'm not dwelling on it. I've just got on with the rest of my life.
Yeah, if you can reach acceptance and just let it go, that's good enough for your mental health. And if you can't reach acceptance, then you need to do some work. I remember one time I was working with an activist group working on gay marriage, and one of the people in the group I was working with, she was working with a federal minister's office, and I had asked her a question. Actually, a journalist had approached me asking a question, and I got in touch with her. She sent me an answer by email from her office, her work email address, and I forwarded the email to the journalist. And she was so upset because I had outed her as a lesbian, and she was working in the minister's office, and the journalist could have picked this up, and it could have made trouble for the minister at that time. And there was nothing I could do, and I felt so bad. Nothing I could do to amend any of the harm that I had caused. The only thing I could do was say, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that would be a problem. But it's certainly made me change my behavior since that day. Very, very careful about who I send emails to. But yeah, she never spoke to me again.
She never spoke to you again?
Never spoke to me again.
Right.
And I felt so bad about it. Yeah. I really didn't do much work with that group anymore after that. And so, you know, a bit of forgiveness there might have helped us continue the good fight together, but it was not to be.
Could I just say that some of the issue around your situation, for instance, is that not only did you feel really bad about it, but you weren't presented with the opportunity, or you couldn't manufacture the opportunity to open another dialogue. and
Mm.
and repair, maybe repair the relationship. I've had not the same. My situation was my husband had been harmed emotionally, particularly by his mother, and he reached a stage where we were married by that stage, and I had been trying to keep the door open, so to speak. And eventually my husband said, it is counterproductive and damaging to our very being to continue to have this relationship with her. I have no wish to continue. And I felt really sad on his behalf that he couldn't forgive her. But I would have to say that over the years where we didn't have any contact, I'd left the door open for her, so to speak. She never made contact with us ever again. I felt really, really sad that we couldn't have had a reconnection and an opportunity, like Les said. I hope you don't mind me calling you Les. Is it Leslie?
Yeah, Les.
Les, okay.
My friends call me Les.
Okay. I'll count myself one of those. Where the opportunity has now passed, and there wasn't that opportunity to explain why you hurt me, so to speak. And so I continue to feel, and in fact, my husband died several years ago, and I still feel sad. I have accepted that he couldn't forgive her. She couldn't even understand that there was an issue. But I feel really sad on his behalf that there was not a time where he could say to her, this is the hurt that you caused me, the pain, the grief, the sorrow, the anguish, the tearing down that you caused me. Whether she would have either understood or cared is an entirely different issue.
So I think this comes back to what KJ asked before, which is why is forgiveness difficult? To have that conversation, you have to make yourself vulnerable to the
So
person
true.
who's hurt you. And that's a terribly difficult thing to do. But it may turn out to be really worthwhile, or it may just open the door and allow them to hurt you again. So you have to weigh up whether to have that vulnerability and try to rebuild that relationship, or to protect yourself from that person by walling them off. And it comes down to how much that hurt, how much harm they have the power to do to you.
Yes, and I think that was something that was a big aha moment for me in your introduction about forgiveness, that sometimes it is better for all, and acceptance becomes your way forward, because forgiveness is never going to happen.
Has anyone ever thought of the fact that the person who feels upset and harmed could be wrong?
Good point.
Well, they're not wrong in what they're feeling. They're feeling the things that they feel.
Yes, they could be feeling that, but they could be absolutely wrong.
They could be wrong about what's caused those feelings.
Yes. As a psychotherapist, you've got to have an open mind. I know one friend who blamed his son for problems, whereas in reality, he was the problem.
It is really important to try to keep that open mind about your own.
And anyone who can't can be wrong for their life.
Yes. And that's a sad situation to be in, because you can't fix things if you don't understand the real root cause of the problem.
That's right. And the person this example concerned the behaviour of a teenage son and a father who believed that the son was the problem, couldn't get any help from psychologists and psychiatrists. He never had the thought that he could be wrong.
Mm.
And as a result of it, his son became an alcoholic
Mm.
and died of alcoholic poisoning.
Oh, that's terrible.
And the son never had the chance to talk to his father, in a sense, and explain it until he was dying. And then he had what he say. But this particular friend didn't want to know. What I'm saying is he heard and listened to his son, but the thought that he had made life a misery for his family never occurred to him.
It might have been too hard a thought to entertain, you know.
Well, I suppose it goes back to the way he was dealt with by his father, but his wife certainly was aware of all this.
That's the intergenerational trauma we were talking about earlier. It does tend to be passed down from.
But he didn't want to know.
Mm.
Now, there's one thing you said, Mary-Anne, that made me think about the case that I'm talking about and a case that Meg was talking about, where a lot of harm was caused, and there was the option to, I'll use the word confront the perpetrator, and you made the observation that you've got to, how did you put it? You've got to go there with a sense of vulnerability, of exposing yourself.
It does make you vulnerable, yeah.
And I'm thinking, in these cases, you've got to do the opposite. You've been building up some resilience, some psychological strength to be able to develop your own sense of value, because it's been, forced down all those years by this perpetrator. So when you do go to meet the perpetrator, I'm thinking the last thing you want to see yourself as is vulnerable, because you've been vulnerable all your life. That's why the harm was caused. So you want to go there with a sense of resilience, psychological strength, fortitude, because that's the only way you're going to get through it. If you go to confront that person thinking, oh, I might be at fault, you're just going to shrivel up into a heap. So I'm thinking that those kinds of cases, you need to go in with the opposite psychological.
A suit of armour.
Yeah. Well,
but then it's difficult to have a conversation.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say suit of armour, because I'm thinking that's where the strength is from something that you put on the outside, but I'm thinking it's the exact opposite. The strength has got to come from
a spine of steel you're talking about then.
Within.
Yeah, yes, I think that's a good point. You need to speak up, but you also need to face the fact that that person will not accept
their part in it.
Their part in it.
Necessarily.
That's one of the reasons why I didn't approach this person, because a couple of them had, I think, clinical narcissism. And that's why, I'd never be able to get through to the harm they cause, because they always think the fault is always with somebody else. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't even try.
Yeah, well, if I've got a friend that whenever I talk about anything concerning myself, he immediately changed the subject about him. Always him.
Sounds a bit like a clinical narcissist too. Cyrus, you had your hand up briefly a little while ago, before Neville put his hand up. Did you have something to say?
Oh, just to add what Joe was saying, and we're talking about forgiveness in families. I think nowadays it's good to also add up like harm and benefit and stuff with certain family members if there's problematic behaviors. And I think there's a lot of research now into like family estrangement and how it can be beneficial for both parties.
Mm.
And yeah, it's important to focus on building the life you want to lead, and if that person's a part of it or not, and maybe you can reach forgiveness down the line.
Sometimes you just need to walk away and find forgiveness or acceptance by yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Like,
Now,
yeah, sometimes you can't, yeah, always, it's not always a two-part conversation in that, it's that, yeah, internal thought process.
Neville, you've got your hand up.
Yes, going to what Joe said and a little bit about what Cyrus was saying about internal processes. So, I think, the dynamic here and forgiveness is about communication. And as you know, I'm a scholar who looks at ways of thinking. And I do have an example of that where there's, it's a mundane context. And I think that, the television and the cinema sort of plays up on the drama of this sort of forgiveness and family breakdown and so forth. But it can be really mundane. And I did do a post recently about when I was at the conferences, and I was trying to communicate to a gentleman about the silences that I am very frustrated about. I put out a lot of work and it doesn't seem to get the engagement. I'm trying to explain to him the non-engagement. But rather than sort of accepting that I might have had a genuine problem in terms of the issue that I was actually describing, he basically says I had a communication problem. Now, the way that I dealt with it wasn't I was able to be critical of my own ways of thinking. So I did think about, the fact it was in the context of doing a presentation, and I had reduced a very short presentation of a very complex paper, and I'm going to rewrite that and give it to him. But what he said was, you have a communication problem and you need to go to a clinical psychologist to explain what the problem is, because I don't know what it is, but I just think because I couldn't follow your presentation, you must have this clinical psychological problem. And so in terms of my work in looking at ways of thinking, I just think that we don't realize how challenging and how difficult it is and how often we fail to make that communication connection, that the other person really understands what I'm saying and I understand what the other person is saying. And the only way to do it is to be able to do that meta reflection around, well, maybe I wasn't thinking about things, that reflects the state of affairs being the philosophical term for what actually is. And so you need to be self-critical, but also I think you also go, as you say, acknowledge that with our communication with others, often other people do not quite understand what we're trying to say.
Yes.
And that can be a barrier to forgiveness too. Folks, I feel like I need to call it a night. Thank you very much for coming along tonight. It's been good to see all of you, and thanks for contributing to the discussion. If you'd like to carry on with the discussion, Les, are you up for continuing on?
Yeah, I can stay for a few minutes more. I think this was scheduled for is it 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock?
Yes.
So I'm happy to stay till 9. Did you want to say about the recording and who might not want to appear on it? Did you want to talk about the editing of the recording, Mary-Anne?
Yes, just wanted to check in if people are comfortable with publishing the recording of the discussion, or if you'd prefer to clip it down to just the presentation.
I'm okay with it.
Okay with the discussion as well, myself.
Yeah.
If there are no objections, we'll publish the whole thing. We may need to get in touch with other people who appear on the video, perhaps. But yes, thank you very much, everyone. I will have a little bit of a rest for the rest of the evening. Good to see you
Please
all.
do.
And take
Thank
care.
you. And thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Mary-Anne.
Thank
Really
you.
good to see you. Feel better.
Thanks.
Take care.